I love hearing from GoodHard Story listeners about what's happening in your lives and how I might encourage you along the way. Without fail, common things always emerge from your DMs and emails and comments. As I love to say, the most personal stories usually teach us the most universal truths. Recently, my team received two very similar emails from people in very different circumstances. As I read these messages, I realized they were both asking the very same question. Who is telling us the story of who we are and who we should be? As we continue our focus on identity formation, it's so important that we address who and what is influencing the people that we are becoming. I'm a people pleaser and a rule follower, so these emails really resonated with me. But I've also been set free from perfectionism by my imperfect life. I want to share some of that freedom with these two listeners and honestly with you. I'm joined by my friend and teammate Caroline Young today, and I know Caroline will have some really valuable insights for you too. Caroline is a a thoughtful believer and engager of all of these conversations. So I thought we'd get started today by reading these emails.
I'm so honored to be with you guys today. I'm going to read our first email from one of our listeners. She says, I'm a perfectionist. I feel like the enemy lies to me a lot about my failings, and I have a hard time knowing the difference between God's conviction versus the enemy's condemnation. I also struggle with anxiety, so this makes everything even harder for me because I overthink a lot. And it's hard to wade through my anxious thoughts to hear what God is really saying and to hear if I've ever done something wrong to begin with, or if it's just a lie of me needing to be a perfectionist and the enemy's condemnation along with it.
And email number 2. I have been walking with the Lord since I was 4, and now I'm 72. I'm in a season where I'm caring for a disabled husband. I'm the center of everyone's universe here. With so much orbiting around me, I have very little emotional energy to want to go to church to talk to other people. My life is very busy, and I'm trying to balance it all in the framework of walking with the Lord right where I'm planted. The guilt feelings get in the way. I've been guilted about wanting to just enjoy my church service online, and it really bothers me. I love the Lord and want to serve him. Church affiliation right now just feels hypocritical for me, as it is mostly just exhausting. How do I deal with not living up to others' expectations in the midst of handling increased home responsibility and trusting that God will make a path to do what he wants us to do? Or should I just get on board and follow the rules, whether it's meaningful or not? Interesting question.
And both so relatable.
And both so tender and honest and vulnerable. I'm deeply moved that you would reach out and ask these things, and I'm delighted to explore and unpack this without answers. I don't think either one of us would pretend to know perfectly where to land in all realms, please.
Definitely not. But both questions feel so human. Like so relatable.
So relatable. As much as most personal as most universal. We're all feeling it.
Amen. Both of these people seem to be motivated by loving and wanting to please God. Like they're both faithful believers, but they also are trying to please people. One being a perfectionist and one being a caregiver, which can be good, obviously, to love the people in your life, but pleasing God and pleasing people at the same time doesn't always feel straightforward.
Right.
It can feel pretty complicated.
Yeah.
And I know that you have felt that deep desire with people that you're close to in your life, but also just with people in general. Like when you're at camp or on the road or at Mend or wherever it may be, you have a desire to people please everyone. So what has that looked like for you as you discern between what God expects of you and what people expect of you?
I definitely do not claim to have figured it out fully. So please hear me when I say I'm decidedly not remotely an expert in this arena. So very naturally, I am a people pleaser, achiever, Enneagram 3, want to do it all really well. But then I had a massive stroke and became disabled. So I can't possibly remotely keep up with the Joneses or please everybody at all. I'm going to let the PTA sign up to make the brownies pass me by and let down the, head of the classroom. I'm going to, whatever it is, I'm barely going to be able to show up for my life every day, much less like do it all perfectly. So I've had to let at least some people pleasing go, I think, by being forced to, which is healthy actually. But when it comes to the Lord, I think that being a disabled person, a person who lives with disabilities, is actually the posture the Lord wants us to have anyway. Instead of trying to please man, you can't. All that really matters is the internal, the spiritual anyway. So I'm wasting a lot of time trying to be a busybody, which I can't really do anymore anyway. And maybe it's all about focusing on hearing from the Lord anyway. I feel like the Lord, we're probably going to get to this in a minute actually, but the Lord, as he moves and speaks, makes it clear when something is all Catherine's desire or, oh, clearly the Lord is in this. Get on board with what he is actually doing in the story. And then that's actually going to ultimately be the thing that succeeds in life because the Lord is working and moving, and I just need to stop trying so hard and get on board.
So it's almost like you can't thwart what the Lord's doing in your life versus if you're trying to people please, it's almost like things get in the way. Like you get in your own way.
Yeah, and you're out on your own, on an island really trying to work it, and it just doesn't go well. And you think it's all up to me and I got to make this thing awesome versus just like, no, the Lord is at work. Wake up and see it. I love the deep truth of Hosea 6:3 that says, let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. His going forth is as certain as the dawn. He will come to us like the rain, like the spring when the rain waddling the earth. Let us press on to acknowledge the Lord because the Lord's already at work and on the move. So we just need to get on board, get in alignment with what he's doing.
I think that word alignment resonates so well with email number 1. Like listener said, I have a hard time knowing the difference between God's conviction versus the enemy's condemnation. And she struggles with anxiety, which is something I can relate to. So she overthinks a lot. And what you just so beautifully quoted is like, if we acknowledge the Lord in everything, we can look through it through the lens of, is this of his character? Like with conviction, it would produce truth, honesty, humility, whereas with condemnation from the enemy, it would be shame, guilt, like the tendency to want to please other people. And that like provides a really clear lens of knowing, is this of the Lord? Am I acknowledging him? Or is this of man or of the enemy, to where like these feelings don't align with his character and who he says he is?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think people pleasing is often found hand in hand with perfectionism, which you just said you've had to basically let go of in large part because of your story and the stroke and the disability that you're living with. But do you still have any rules that like you once lived by that you've now realized were not actually coming from God? Like how you said you had a tendency to be like the good Christian soldier, like you needed to show up. Do you have anything you feel like you've been able to release in your walk with God?
Yeah, I mean, all the things, honestly. I need to do this or do that to earn my credentials as what is that Kim Stewart book? I love that.
Oh, Star for Jesus.
Yes, you should link to it in the show notes. Kim Stewart, an incredible thinker, writer, person, Hope Hills Camp CC, wrote a book called Star for Jesus and Other Jobs I Quit. And I feel a little that way. I used to be a star for Jesus, but maybe I'm not anymore. Maybe that's a good thing, actually. I still am in the process of unlearning how to stop trying to give God good PR. I think he's got it covered. So I don't need to try so hard. Also, this is interesting. Until I became a person living with disabilities, I secretly was pretty judgy, I'm sure, about people who didn't go to a regular Sunday morning church service like clockwork. It should be part of your routine. And now I've backpedaled a bit to say life is messy and complicated, and being among people living with disabilities regularly means A, it is extremely difficult sometimes to engage a church body because there's church hurt. There's weaponizing of scripture. There's people who just want to pray away what you're living through. There's just like a lot of spiritual baggage. And B, the logistics of being in a church service space, getting through the door many times, literally being in the building, can be incredibly complicated. So very much backpedaled to say, do I believe it's important to have a church body? 100%. Do I believe in every season it's a perfect fit for everyone? Absolutely not. My goodness. And I think church attendance was very important to me in one season of life.
And that's so funny too, because if you referencing like it was very important to me in one season of life was probably when you're viewing church attendance more through the lens of perfectionism and being a good Christian soldier. And, that question of, do we think God is taking attendance of when we're in church? And then to flip that question on its head, like, is it more important for us to be in church as a church body for us as sinful humans, or is it more important to the Lord? Like, is he the one taking attendance? And where I feel like I've fallen is like, that's one of those things that is really more about us,
right?
And our heart posture and why we're there, and less about God telling us we have to be there.
100%. Yes. It's never God telling us we have to be there, but we need church because we need people to walk with us through life. We need the spiritual encouragement of hearing from fellow believers, believing and living out the same thing we are. The benefits of church would be pretty clear and tremendous.
Yeah.
However, is that available to everyone in every season? Absolutely not.
Yeah, definitely not.
I think we skipped ahead. We're about to talk about that. I forgive us in advance for how I do this like every episode.
No, that put us in a place that we need to be, because similar with church attendance being really hard logistically and emotionally, that can lead us to a place of confusing the voices of anxiety and shame with God's voice. So, for instance, is God the one telling us, you need to get to church, even if that means you have to get your husband up out of bed 5 hours early just to get him dressed, ready, and in the car, because you feel anxiety and shame around not being in the building.
Right. And into the wheelchair and transferring into the car and back into the wheelchair.
Yes.
And you're both in horrific moods and hate every minute of it. But
regardless of what the reason is, for our listener, that would be one of the reasons. But it's hard to know what God's inviting us into versus what we're being guilted into by people or even the enemy. So how do we distinguish between feelings of conviction and feelings of guilt? And I was having a conversation, I was just telling you this earlier, with someone recently, and I cannot remember who said this, but I was struggling with that question. And they said conviction oftentimes feels like taking a sharp knife and it going straight through like room temperature butter. So if you like think of a stick of butter that's sitting out next to your stove, it's like easy. It slides right through, straight to the heart.
Yeah.
Like God doesn't beat around the bush when it comes to conviction. It's very hard to ignore.
Yeah.
Whereas with guilt and shame and anxiety, it's hard to even get to the root of what the feeling is. It's often surrounded by like thousands of questions, berating yourself, tears.
Totally. And not knowing the source.
Right.
I think for me, I mean, I got all the issues. I overthink. Wait, did I say that wrong or right? Did I do this wrong or right? Is this the right way? Is this the right thing? And my head is so cloudy.
Mm-hmm.
But conviction, and that would be the guilt side of things. The conviction side is like, I felt clear purpose and direction and clearly called by the Lord to this thing. So I don't care about the voices in my head doubting me. So maybe it's a difference in
clarity.
Yeah, totally.
That's so good. And that goes back to saying like we can always rely on who God says he is in scripture. Like he is a God of clarity, not confusion.
Yeah, totally.
So whereas like the enemy uses shame and guilt to confuse and make things not as clear, whereas conviction is very straightforward. In the long run, what happens to us when we live from guilt, or what has happened to you in the past when you live from guilt or shame rather than from conviction?
You hate every minute of what you signed up for. You feel miserable and like, striving. I'm doing this, because I'm striving and I know this is not what these people wanted. I'm not a happy camper. I signed up for something and I'm miserable, or whatever it is. I hate this. And I know that I hate this, but now I'm kind of in a pickle and I don't know what to do because I'm not just walking with the Lord unafraid. And I imagine that's what it always comes back to. What about you?
Yeah, I think similarly, I don't even really realize sometimes that I'm living from guilt. I think I've often let time go by for such a long time of living in a place of guilt. So like, for instance, if I'm in a season of not waking up and sitting with a cup of coffee with my journal and my Bible open and doing like a quiet time, like how we so often think quiet time is supposed to look.
Totally.
The guilt and shame like builds up on top of each other to where it gets harder. Like I'll even look over at my windowsill and feel some sort of shame because I feel like I haven't been meeting with the Lord.
Yeah.
And I had a counselor ask me one time when we were discussing this topic, she was like, okay, turn and look towards my front door. If Jesus like walked in right now, he just like opened the front door and sat down with you and me, how do you think he would be feeling? And I said, I think he would be disappointed. Like I would be like, I would hope that I hadn't disappointed him somehow. And that like cut straight to the source of like what I was feeling of like condemnation and guilt and shame around the fact that somehow I was letting him down. Yeah, so totally. There are things in life that we might not always want to do, but we know they're good for us in the long run. So there's stuff like exercise or going to the dentist, 2 things that I've been trying to do lately. But it's not always easy, but it's a worthwhile investment. So what are some disciplines in your life that fall into that category? Rhythms that are life-giving, but not necessarily easy that you've felt conviction over? Yeah.
So actually the exercise one resonates with me in this moment because sometimes the last thing a person with disabilities wants to do is further move their body. Basic movement's hard enough, but I'm really trying to exercise in this new year regularly. I did for 3 days in a row, I might add, which is something to celebrate. Something to celebrate. But for sure, deeper than that. Sometimes I'm really like, I'm not going to be able to show up for my kids the way I want to, or, mom them the way I really think. For instance, Jay, I've said this before probably, but Jay drives them. But I feel like if I hadn't had a stroke and could drive, I would drive them to places like school. So I ride in the car, and that's pretty unnecessary. Like, they don't need me to ride in the car. Jay's driving the car. But I know the difference it makes to have mom in the picture. And so I'm riding in the car to and from. Is that an example of that?
Yeah, like you don't necessarily want to be getting in the car.
Not always. It's not like, oh, I can't wait to pop up and go, or bedtime, like tuck them into bed, I'm tired too, or whatever the thing is, showing up. As a mom can be hard, honestly. No one says that, but showing up as a mom is exhausting.
And I think, like, honestly, we were talking about church attendance earlier, would sometimes fall into that category as well.
For sure.
We don't necessarily want to get up and get dressed and go to church, or like get the kids all dressed and get them in the car and go to church. But if we're in a season where we know that's going to be life-giving.
Oh, for sure. And there's grace for, you know what? This morning, since I got home at midnight last night from a speaking event, guess what, everybody? Family church day. So Jimmy preached the sermon. John played the piano. Jay do Alexia. We're going to have our own little church. And that's not the end of the world. Not as ideal. For sure, love being among the body of believers. Goodness. But now and then, yeah, do it. Goodness, there's grace.
I love that.
I think so many times in life we are motivated, at least I am as a people pleaser, but I think this is a universal feeling of just longing for acceptance. Everywhere we go. I love the Audrey Assad song where there's a line that says, deliver me from the need to be understood, the need to be accepted. And I resonate so deeply with both of those. And I really wrestle in life with, what do I feel like is obligatory? What am I doing because I feel obligated to do it? And what am I doing motivating? Where am I showing up from a place of acceptance, not for acceptance? And I think that's such an important distinction, is we can show up. I know that the Lord is propelling me and I'm here and I've got the acceptance I need already. I'm not looking for you to affirm me, I guess is what I'm saying. So I don't know the exact question in that, other than, do you feel similarly? Like you can kind of tell the difference, or you're working it out, or?
I think I'm working it out. It's interesting. I think there's things in my life that I feel obligated to do because of this season of life that I'm in. Like I often will tell myself, because I'm single and don't have kids, I need to be the one who's leading a Bible study of younger girls, or I need to be serving at church because I have the extra time. I need to be the one who's hosting things or offering to have things at my house because it's easier for me because there aren't kids in the picture. Like I think there's just a lot of things sometimes I think I feel obligated to because of like, almost like that not perfectionism, but like tendencies that I just lean towards. But then when I think about the root of that, it's like that's coming from shame and guilt and not from a place of acceptance of like, I really like want to,
or a place of desire, like
or a place of desire, and like a real genuineness behind those actions. And that's where I have to go back to time and time again. Is this conviction? Is this something that God is like calling me to, asking me to do, like asking me to be there, asking me to show up? Or do I feel the freedom and acceptance to know that I am like loved just as I am as his daughter, and I don't have to do anything else?
There's nothing you can add.
There's nothing I can add to. And I feel like one usually comes from freedom, and then one usually comes from guilt or shame.
First of all, let me say, it is so sad to hear that consistently among single people in the church. Church, we have got to do something different to make single people feel guilty that they're not doing enough, hosting enough, signing up enough. Like, that's really a tragedy. I hate that. I hate that for you, Carol.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
That is a good example too of like conviction and condemnation, or conviction versus condemnation. Like, Do you feel condemned because you're not hosting, showing up, serving, or do you feel convicted too? And like at my church, when a pastor stands up on stage and says they need extra hands in the kids service, like I can feel conviction because I love my church and I love the kids of our church, regardless of my marital status.
Right.
Like that's just conviction out of like, I want to help care for God's body of children as a member of this church. It has nothing to do with like, well, you should really be down there because it's easier for you to get to church on a Sunday morning.
Totally.
Because you have the time and the space and, it's not as hard. So yeah, I think just, again, constantly going back to the root of where are these feelings coming from? Are they from acceptance and freedom?
Right.
Or are they from guilt and shame?
Totally. It's all about whether we feel like it's an obligation or not. I am desperately trying to learn. So I have a sweet friend who I went to a dinner party at her house recently, and she asked me what temperature I want my meat, my tenderloin she was having for this fancy dinner for her birthday. And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. I don't know. And I'm like in my head, like, this is so what I always do. Like, can't even make a decision about how hot I want my meat. What on earth? It's so dysfunctional. And it was very sad. And I realized in that moment, like, I've got to put into practice what my therapist worked so hard with me on was, what temperature do you want your meat? You can decide that and can decipher that. But my friend did go on to say that you may not be able to tell me the temperature of your meat, but you go for the jugular and the southern realms. So it's actually okay. We're working through the little things, but for some of the big things, you have real clarity. And
I was going to say, I feel like that's usually because you're pretty good at discerning when you feel convicted about something.
Maybe so.
When something's of.
Well, that's funny. And shout out to Elizabeth who said that. I may not know the temperature I want my meat, but I go for the jugular and many other realms, telling the world, let's disrupt the myth that joy only comes in a pain-free life.
That's so good, though. You want to know why? Because telling the world that joy can be found, disrupting the myth, telling the world that it's not true, that joy can only be found in a pain-free life. That is conviction. Like there's never been a day in your life that you've thought like, maybe God told me wrong. Like maybe that's not, you're like, no, I'm certain. Like I'm like, it's a knife through butter. Like I know that's
actually a good example.
I know that's not a nice call, but your tendency to people please with being asked, how would you like your dinner cooked?
And how do you like your meat done? I want the same temperature as you, because then you'll like me more. Yeah, right. That's so stupid.
That causes confusion and lack of clarity, and you feel bad that you're asking for something that you want, and like, that's how you know it's people pleasing, because it causes you to scramble and you don't know how to answer the question. And so it's interesting.
You're right.
Like when it comes to God's call in your life, I feel like you have a very good grasp on what conviction is. But when it comes to people in your life is when you don't. Yeah. Or when you struggle, that's probably what you're working with.
I definitely agree. I think 100%. And it's sad. And GoodHard Story listeners, you can pray for me to get that straightened out in the time I have left on this earth. Who knows how long? Is I want to live for an audience of one, but it's always been complicated, and I think that's not just me.
And that is so true. It's not just you. I mean, I identify with that a lot, but also, I mean, now really thinking about this, I can tell in 5 years of being your friend when you are living with conviction for an audience of one, and then when the enemy can get to you and feel like you're people pleasing when you specifically travel on the road to speak.
Well, you should give an example, Carol. I'm very curious.
Like I can tell. No. I mean, just because it's just so clear that it's so of the Lord. Like you have an insane ability to communicate God's message, scripture, using evidence of your own life and the word. And so oftentimes when you live from that confidence and conviction and you go out on a stage or no matter where you are, like you have a sense of like freedom and you're like, almost like unabashed, like there's just like joy and freedom about you and conviction. But then when I feel like the enemy can scramble your thoughts and cause confusion, or comparison could creep in
Right
in
when I
this
get off
industry,
stage.
either right when you get off
Yes.
stage or right before you go on a different stage that you're
Oh.
like not as familiar with. And that's when I want to look at you and be like, what is happening? Like, no, like you know what it looks like.
Look, but that lady's so much better at communicating than I
Exactly.
am. And she's got a cute outfit on.
Yes. And I would get so righteously angry because it's so much easier for me, an outsider, to see like, absolutely not. Like you know the message that the Lord's given you. You had conviction about it. You are extremely gifted at it. You have the Holy Spirit in you. So when all that stuff, the like condemnation comes in, it, as a friend, it makes me so angry. And then they're like, imagine how the Lord feels when we do that.
No, you're
to ourselves.
Exactly right. It is so convicting after I have one of those episodes where I just feel so unworthy, unqualified, it's just stupid. It's such like a imposter syndrome invades, and I feel like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Or if they really knew me, they wouldn't think I was that great, so I'll just not enter in. All the feelings,
which is so valid. I mean,
Yeah.
that's so human. It is so valid. Of like, or I can't believe they've asked me to do this, and it's like, no,
I'm so embarrassed.
like,
Yeah.
Live
for sure.
Live from that confidence of knowing, like, this is what the Lord has called me to do, and He's given me the conviction to say the things that are on this piece of paper in front of me. And that's obviously so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
Especially as women, as I'm sure a lot of our, women listeners can attest to.
Yes, a lot of our listeners are women, but shout out to the few dudes who faithfully listen. Jonathan Starks, you're an amazing man. And a Camper family, so you always have my heart. And others. I'm very, very grateful for our men. But yes, uniquely, women are just caught in the trap. I just don't think men care as much. Like, Jay's not worried about what people think, but Catherine is. And I think maybe men do a smidge, but women do a lot.
Yeah. So, thinking about the story that we tell ourselves, like whether it be right before we get on a stage to speak, or trying to discern whether or not we need to volunteer in kids ministry at church.
Yeah.
Who is telling you the story of who you are and who you should be?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the Lord, or is it other people in your life, or the enemy that's giving condemnation, or is it the Lord who's giving you clarity
Yep.
of conviction and of truth? So who would you say on most days is telling you the story of who you are and who you should be?
It's very complicated for sure, but I pray I'm listening to the Lord's voice above the other voices, that it's the loudest. I mean, I don't think that's 100%. My goodness. I pray it. Maybe when I'm the 72-year-old lady here, I don't know. I pray so. But I do think, the Lord's voice is the loudest, but there's a lot of mess. And in sad moments of deep insecurity, I'm sure it's the voices of all the other people that don't matter in my life. The stranger I don't know who on Instagram thinks I'm so cool and I feel like I'm not. Like, what does she matter? What on earth? But I'm sure that's not just me. That's the tendency to feel unworthy to show up for your own life.
Yeah, I know. I definitely feel that. I think one space that I have felt that lately with who is telling me the story of who I am and who I should be is, this sounds so maybe millennial basic, but whatever. It's influencers on Instagram.
Oh, influencer, yeah.
Like, I think
of which I am one. You realize, as hysterical as it is, and how much I reject that, I can't even tell you. People do send me free things to advertise, and I don't. And people want to pay me to put stuff on Instagram, and we decline. But yours truly is an influencer. It's almost hilarious to say.
Yeah, well, influencers in a different category are telling me I need to buy this serum and use this device that's going to like pull my cheeks up at an angle and totally. Use sleep in things at night, and I need mouth tape, and I need to do this to get my jaw at a different angle. Like it goes on and on and on and
for
on.
sure.
Like I need to be getting this amount of steps, and like this electrolyte has too much table salt in it and too much sugar in it. And it just like I've started to realize like those voices are becoming louder. It's like I've never cared or pay attention to them as much as I am right now. And it's directly related to the amount of time that I'm spending on my phone. And it's like, so I'm listening to the voices of comparison and then being told like I'm not enough and living out of guilt and shame. And then I avoid my windowsill because I don't want to go listen to the voice that's more important than any of them of the Lord, because I've gotten myself stuck in this spiral of listening to other voices.
Totally. Oh goodness. I don't know if I've ever told this story on here. I'm getting old and things blend, so forgive me if I have. I've told it IRL many times that Instagram was never a place I really felt a lot of comparison, because I just can't keep up with 99% of the people I'm following. I'm like, well, that's great for them, but not my life. That's fine. However, there was this one lady, and I'll be very vague because she's in the public sphere.
I know where the story's going.
You've heard this before. Yes. And it got so bad. I'll show you the specifics, but her life seemed absolutely perfect. She is incredibly beautiful, talented. I can't say too many more specifics or it might give away who I'm talking about, but she had it all. The quote unquote perfect life. Super wealth, and I mean super, super wealth. Like super, I mean, she owned I won't give specifics, but her life was fabulous on the outside. And so I have never done this, but I decided I am so sick of seeing her life and feeling this jealousy that her life is so wonderful that I unfollowed her, which I know may feel like commonplace to most now, but like this was probably 5-6 years ago. And at least for me, I'd never unfollowed anyone. It was a really big deal. I felt so mean. She has like thousands of followers.
Your people pleasing tendencies.
Right. Yes.
Someone would be
100% people pleasing tendencies. I'm like, what if she knows that I did this? It's so mean. But I unfollowed her. But several years after that, news articles started coming out that her life had blown up in the most tragic, dramatic way. And I won't share details again because this could be mean to her, and it's not. If anything, I want to build up this woman publicly because she's a survivor of just a lot of really sad things that happened to her.
Yeah.
And it was just such a moment for me, besides a deep just compassion for the soul. I just felt so like, I don't know the word even, like I was feeling jealousy, and yet like, really, Catherine, you were feeling jealous? Like, look, how do you feel now, Catherine? Like, I don't even know the lesson in that per se, other than this real sense of like, from God, like, Catherine, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Like, look what's happened. Everybody has their turn living through hell. Why are you comparing yourself to her perfect life? Her life is not perfect in this moment. How do you feel now? And I felt no sense of like, I'm so glad her life is horrible, like revenge for being awesome. No. If anything, I was like, I want to write her a letter and call her and tell her she's going to be okay, and send her a book and tell her to press on through her darkness. And it was like a flip in my head. And I think it was really just a valuable lesson for me in all the realms we're discussing today, actually.
Yeah. Well, it was a kindness of God to show you who is telling you the story of who you are.
I love that you already know the story too, Caroline. It's deeply impacted me.
Yeah. Well, because you were listening to a voice that you didn't need to be listening to. And he wasn't using her as an example, but like you got to like understand something about.
But she was decidedly an influencer.
Right.
Back to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you want to ask the concluding
Yes,
question?
shall we close this episode by asking each other what's good in your story, what's hard in your story, and how do you live in the tension of both of those in your GoodHard story? So, what's good in my story right now is that it's a new year. It's 2025. We're here. We're showing up like we've made it. Truly, I feel like that. And I want to encourage you listeners, like you are here for a reason in this story, even if it's really hard. And we get to do this life. Like it's a gift to be here. I've seen way too many stories in the last nearly 17 years of people who aren't here or are so impaired that they can't really show up very much in their lives. And it's a tragedy. And with a messed up voice, and I shouldn't say messed up, with a voice that is significantly impaired and with a body that is significantly impaired, I am able to have this absolutely amazing career. The Lord has allowed just tremendous blessings on all fronts. I've got this banging family that I love. I've got this amazing life. And yeah, 2025 is so good. And yet all of that is so hard. None of it is one note. All of it is complicated, and I live with profound disabilities, and some days that is just very annoying, to be honest. And I want to jump behind the seat of a car and drive through and get a Coke at the drive-through, and I can never do that, probably short of a miracle. I want to go on a jog. I don't remember what it feels like to jog anymore. That is so weird. It's been nearly 17 years and that's sad. Or I'll hear a recording of my old voice and it's interesting. I'll be almost intrigued. Like, did I sound that Southern in real life? Or was my voice that high and like weird? And then I'm like, wait, no, this is the weird one, but maybe it isn't. Maybe that's not a thing. Maybe it's all great. Who knows? Anyway, my disabilities are both good and hard. The other random hard thing I want to add, because it's very relatable, is I'm doing like a version of Whole30, except I am having yogurt because I can't live without it.
Disclaimer.
And it is so hard. Oh my gosh. I cannot even tell you. I feel like my world has been rocked this time by a true Whole30. So that's all I got.
I understand that on a deep level by someone who has done it in the past and is choosing not to do it right now. But
well, that's also awesome. That's what's good. That's what's good in your story.
That is what's good in my
You're
story.
not doing Whole30.
So true. What's good in my story? What's hard in my story?
Yeah.
I think I've shared this before, but I'll just share it again because it's still true.
Totally.
What's good in my story is that I have really solid community, and that's always been good in my story, and I'm so thankful for it. I've been friends with some of the same people for a long time, which means we know each other really, really well, and I feel known, and I know them, and I feel deeply loved.
I have to jump in and just say, we're talking, this community is some of the most vibrant and beautiful I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, they are like living out Dietrich Bonhoeffer life together in real time. It's so beautiful.
Well, that's very kind. I am very grateful for it. What's hard about that is that these people that I'm doing life with and have known for a very long time are in a very different life stage than me. And so community now looks really different. So at 34, most of my friends have 3 babies, 2 or 3 babies that are now toddlers, the oldest one being in kindergarten, and being single and dating, not having kids. It's just more and more I live in that tension of knowing I won't Bonhoeffer do life, quote unquote, with them in the same way that they're doing alongside of one another. And it is a really good thing that I have them and love them and know them. And it's a really hard thing. And kind of like a grieving that it won't be in the same life stage kind of ever again, because they just keep moving forward, and I'm in a different place. So I kind of live in that tension regularly because of a social calendar and nap schedules and things like that. But that also means I get to know and love their children, who I'm obsessed with. So that's also a really good thing too.
Yes, it is, but it just weirds me out that I want to speak to what you just said, though. That's not true. That I don't even know what you just said, but it made me really mad that you feel like they're like passing you in life. They're not. That's not a thing. Like, you are living out your story and they are living out theirs.
Yeah, right.
And as a church, we've got to normalize the fact that some people are at different stages. That means no kids and no husband. And that's not something that should be shame-inducing.
Yeah, or like bad with a capital B, but maybe different with a capital D.
Yeah, well, exactly, 100%. And that's just a tragedy that you feel that way. And you shouldn't. You 100% shouldn't feel that way. If anything, they're gifts to every season, life stage, and never a season or life stage, and they're gifts to all the seasons of life. I mean, I just think there are great things about having kids and being married, and there are really hard things about that.
So true.
One shouldn't be idolized.
No, it's very, very true.
Anyway, here's the GoodHard story. We talk about all the random things, and we're so grateful for each of you journeying with us through complicated topics and feelings and how to walk with the Lord through all the mess of life. And it just means so much to know and hear directly from several of you through these emails today, just really wrestling with how to live and how to thoughtfully engage your life. I do struggle with unworthiness right there. I'm like, I'm not the person to ask how to do this thing called life. So I'm humbled, but I'm wanting to fail with you all and figure it out together and put the pieces back together. I heard recently that absolutely unravel, whatever it is, unravel your faith, deconstruct, sure, but put it back together. Ravel it back up to where you haven't deconstructed for the sake of deconstructing, but for the sake of reconstructing and finding an accurate picture of how to walk with Jesus through life. And I want to be a guide that does that because I'm always wrestling and confused and want the clarity that walking with the Lord brings. So thank you for these conversations and for listening. We're grateful for you and so grateful for Caroline Young, the amazing Caroline Young, being with us today. Stay tuned for more coming at you in our next series. But what a gift to explore identity formation as we start this new year. God bless you guys. Bye.